So again, with our big development process here, we'll focus in on these steps here of getting a single employee by ID and also adding a new employee. And this is primarily for the REST controller methods. We already did this work for the services and the DAOs already. Okay, so now just doing a checkpoint here on our real-time project as far as the list of API methods. So we've already completed the first one here of get to read a list of employees. Now in this video, we'll focus on actually doing a get for a given employee ID for a single employee and also doing a post to create a new employee. Now let's look at the application interaction between our REST client and our REST controller. So with the REST client, we'll do a get /API/employee/employee ID, and it'll return that single employee, in this case, David Adams. Now let's look at creating a new employee, right? So to create a new employee, we use the post method, and in the JSON body, we give the actual information for the first name, last name, and email. And since this is a new employee, we're not passing over an ID or a primary key because that'll actually be generated for us on the back end by the database. So then we'll get the actual response back. So they'll basically echo the response, and they'll also include the actual new ID or the primary key that was generated by the database. So this looks really good. I like this. Now, a couple of things here just as a refresher or a reminder. So when sending JSON data to Spring REST controllers, we have to make sure that we send over the correct HTTP request header. And that header is content type of application/JSON. So we need to configure our REST client to send the correct request header just so it processes the data accordingly. Now again, as a refresher here, we're using Postman as our client. So once we have the UI up for Postman, then we click on Body, then we select Raw, and then we choose the content type of JSON application/JSON. And based on these configs, Postman will automatically set the correct request header. Let's go ahead and open up our employee REST controller.java. And let's expand this window here. And so this is step 4 of reading a single employee. So we'll make use of a get mapping and we'll read the employee by the employee ID. So I'll set up a get mapping for /employees/employee ID as a path variable in curly brace. And the method signature is getEmployee. You take a parameter for path variable as an int employee ID, and it returns a given employee object. And then I'll simply delegate these calls to the employee service. So I'll make use of the employee service.findById, and I pass in the employee ID. And also I'll just add a little if-then check here to check if it's null. If it's null, that means that we didn't find the employee in the database, and so we'll simply throw an exception here. And if everything's fine, we simply return the employee. And that's basically it there for the coding for get employee by given employee ID. So this looks pretty good. Now I can actually run our application and test this out here. So I'll just run this as a Java application. All right, so let's go ahead and swing over to our browser. And I see that I have Leslie Andrews with ID of 1, Emma Baumgarten of ID of 2. So let's just test this out here. So /1 for Leslie. It should return Leslie. Success. This is awesome. I like this. This is exactly what we were looking for. And let's try it for ID of 2. And that returns Emma. Sweet. All right. So this is working. I like it. I like it. Now, one thing I want to do is actually also test this same thing in Postman, just to see how things work over on the Postman side of things. So I have Postman open. I need to give the URL. So I'll just do a little copy paste from my browser over here. Swing back into Postman and paste that. All right, so that's the ID of 2 right now. And if I send that, we should get Emma coming back. Awesome. Sweet. Awesome. Great. So this is working just the same in Postman also. So this is great. Pretty excited. Woohoo. And let's just go ahead and add a new tab here, and let's just get all employees. So I could paste that same piece and just take off the ID. It should give me everyone in the list. Okay, great. So same thing we saw in the browser. So Leslie, Emma, and so on. So this is cool. Great. So we're in good shape here with that method implementation for getting a single employee by ID. All right, so let's swing back over to our IDE. And now step 5, we need to write some code to add a new employee via our REST API. And this will actually be a post to API/employees for adding or creating a new employee. So we know that the employee data is going to come in the request body as JSON. So we need to make use of this @request body annotation to handle binding that JSON over to our given employee object. All right, so this is very similar to what we did in some of our previous videos. So just in case they pass an ID in the JSON, we're going to manually or explicitly set it to 0. This is to force a save of a new item and insert instead of doing an update. So here I have the employee.setID to 0. And that's the basic method here for adding an employee. So we use this post mapping to actually add a given employee. And that employee data comes across in the request body. And oops, I see another typo here. So that's /employee ID. We actually don't need that. That's a typo. So go ahead and remove that. I was probably thinking about some of our previous coding, but that's a typo. So remove that part and then we're A-OK. Let's swing back over to Postman and let's duplicate this tab. And we're going to change this method here to post. So we're posting data and we'll select body, raw, JSON because we're sending over JSON data. And we need to do this so Postman will send over the correct content type. And now in this body here, we can actually just go ahead and write the actual JSON data that we're going to send over for this new employee. So I give first name, last name, and email for this given employee. Hector@lovetocode.com. All right, so this looks good. Let's go ahead and send it. And then we scroll down to the bottom and, ooh, success. We see this new employee ID. So that was generated by the database. All right. Now let's go ahead and confirm this, right? So back in MySQL Workbench, let's go ahead and just execute that query again and just see the results from our database. In this video, we'll look at our REST controller methods for update and delete. So we're almost done here, almost finished with this development process. So steps 6 and 7 of updating an existing employee and also delete an existing employee. And we'll add these as our REST controller methods. And just as a checkpoint here, we've already covered the first 3 methods. Now we'll cover put for doing an update and also delete for actually deleting an employee. Okay, to update an employee, we'll send over a put request for /API/employees, and in the body we'll have JSON, and this will actually have the ID of the employee to update with the updated information for that employee. So then our controller will send back the actual response here, and this response is basically just the updated information, and we simply echo back to the REST client. And now looking at the other scenario here of deleting an employee, so we send over a delete request for API/employee/employee ID, and then the REST controller will send back deleted employee ID, and they'll simply plug in that ID. Okay, so let's swing in here and let's knock out the last 2 steps of this development process of adding the update and delete methods to our REST controller. I'll open up our employee REST controller and expand the window here. And so this is for step 5, update employee. So I'll make use of the put mapping. So I have this method here, update employee. Make use of the annotation @request body because the employee data is going to come in as JSON in the request body. And this is a really straightforward example here. I simply give employee service.save, just delegate it off to the service. And that's pretty much it. Very straightforward for this example here. And this will actually handle the update for the given employee. Okay, so let's test this in Postman. I'll simply duplicate this tab. I'll change the method to put because we're doing an update. So put. And for the actual body, I'll give some updated information for a given ID. So here I want to change the ID of 1, or the employee that has the ID of 1, and give them some new information. So I'll just change the data. I'll give a different first name, last name, and email address. And this is all should apply to employee ID of 1. So an update on employee ID of 1. So we have Tim Patterson. All right, so this looks good. Let's go ahead and send it. And let's just scroll down to the bottom for the response. Okay, so basically the response is just an echo of the data that we passed in. So that's good, fine and dandy. But again, I always like to verify this in MySQL Workbench. So let's go in here. And so first for our employee ID of 1, this is our old data. The old data is Leslie Andrews. But if we run the query again, we should see the new data or the updated data. And oh yeah, success. So for employee ID of 1, the name is now Tim Patterson. Woohoo! I like it. Good job. So this update is working as desired. And we can also test some of our previous items. So get a single employee. And so we could say get single employee ID of 1, do a send, and cool. So that's coming back through our REST API. We can also get all employees. So that's the old data. Once I hit send, then I'll get all the new data. So Tim Patterson of 1. So this is great. So all of our REST APIs are still hitting the same database and we're getting the same data back as expected. Okay, so that's basically it here for the update example. Now let's swing back over and look at step 6 of deleting an employee. So we're going to delete an employee by employee ID. So we'll set up a delete mapping for /employees/employee ID. So we have a method here, delete employee, and we simply make use of @path variable, and we bind that path variable to this method parameter employee ID. And first I'll actually find the employee by ID. So I'll check the employee here to see if they're null. If they're null, I'll simply throw an exception, meaning, hey, this employee didn't exist in our database. If everything's okay, I simply just do employee service.delete by ID. Again, just delegating it to the actual service. And then I just return a string as far as what I did. Hey, I deleted employee ID of blah. So that's all of the main coding there for deleting an employee. Looks pretty good. I like it. Okay, so moving back into Postman, what I'll do is I'll actually duplicate this tab again. And I'll change the method to delete. And for body, since we're not sending any data in the body, I'll hit none. And now I simply give the employee ID that I want to delete. So here I'll say delete employee ID equals 1. Zoom out, hit send. All right, success. So it says it deleted employee ID of 1. Cool. Alrighty, so let's swing over to MySQL Workbench and let's just do a refresh on this data. So first, here's the old data. So Timothy Patterson is ID of 1. And now if we do a refresh, we should see that that person's been removed. Okay, excellent. So the employee with the ID of 1 has been deleted. So that's successful. So whew, I like it. Everything is working as desired. Let's try one more example. Let's delete ID equals 5. So on our Postman, we'll say 5. We'll do a send. We get the response that it's been deleted successfully. Okay, cool. Swing back over to MySQL Workbench and just go through the drill again. So there's the old data. We do a refresh, and then like clockwork, bam, employee ID of 5 has been deleted successfully. So